Hello, technology enthusiasts, and welcome to another episode of Technology Accelerator Video. And today we're going to talk about how to pick the right ERP for your company. So this is a subject that's near and dear to my heart. I've been on many ERP implementations, many cutovers. They're exciting projects for sure. So the reason I wanted to share this with you today is because they are one of the longest projects I've ever worked on, the most complicated, but also the most rewarding. I've probably learned the most from doing ERP projects. And by the way, ERP stands for Enterprise Resource Planning, and we'll go into a full definition in the next slide. I always remember my early career working on an ERP project, and we're making frantic decisions on a Saturday night. It's typically these cutovers implementations are full weekends, 24-hour shifts after sometimes multi-year projects. Anything to do with ERP and SAP or Oracle, anything to do with that always gets the headlines because they are a big deal for most companies. So let's start with defining what is an ERP. And once we define the ERP, then we'll move into the evaluation selection process to make sure you pick the right ERP for your company. So, what is an ERP? Well, it starts with understanding everything about your business. So typically as businesses scale, as they grow, they have the finance team, the IT teams, the sales teams, marketing teams, HR, operations, manufacturing, product teams, customer relationship, all these teams start building up as companies scale. And each one has their own systems. And the concept around an ERP or enterprise resource planning is it brings all of that together. And that's where SAP, Oracle, and the like have really stood up some amazing systems to bring together all that data, all those business processes, all that reporting into one place. The idea behind an ERP is to get that one lens on your business, that one source of truth for your data. So for example, when you sell a product to a customer, finance automatically and very quickly gets an understanding of the cost, the profit, the revenue. The manufacturing team understands the new sales orders coming in. Supply chain knows which products to buy to fulfill the order. Customer service knows who sold the product, who to follow up with. So everyone gets that complete picture of those business events that are happening, those business activities. The challenge is bringing all that together, because once you have all these companies, these departments working, they have different processes. And so bring that together into an ERP can be very difficult. So what I spent a lot of my career in is actually helping companies implement an ERP for an individual area or business unit, or bringing together multiple business units through an ERP as well. So let's start with some examples just to make it a bit more real for you. And we're just going to draw on this chart here as well. So for example, when we talk about ERP, typically we always think about one second, just go back. They always think about the financial management here, ERP in the financial space, accounts payable, financial records, revenue, profit, loss, cash flow. That's typically where most companies think about ERP systems. That's where Oracle comes in, SAP, S/4HANA. Those are Microsoft Dynamics 365. Those are some of the products in that financial management ERP space. But there are many other systems as well. So when you start talking about supply chain management, you're talking about Maximo, some other systems like that, which bring together the end-to-end supply chain process, the asset management process. When you talk about manufacturing companies, there's some specific ERP systems that work for those. So SciFrame is a great example for an ERP for a manufacturing company, because they deal very specifically in products and inventory and raw materials that are coming into the business. And then you can talk about sales and marketing down here as well. You talk about things like HubSpot or Salesforce. These are big systems that bring together all the information related to sales, marketing, revenue that's created from selling the products. And then, of course, human resources, HR. We're talking about workday, success factors. How do you manage the people involved? How do you manage the personal development, sometimes rewards, recognition, performance management, and their entire career from onboarding all the way through to exit. So these, and the other one is project management as well here. So another great example there is PlanView. There are lots and lots of different project management tools that are on the market these days for pulling together all the financials related to a project, the risks, the issues, the status report, that consolidated view of the schedule of all the projects going on. So that was just 5 areas that are pretty common. But when you think about it, you're starting to bring together all of these systems and all of this information or this business process into one place. So I'm just going to tag also asset management as well there as well. So when you start to bring all of this together, that's when you bring together this ERP. That's the enterprise resource planning. And the reason for that is because if you have this one lens of all your data from all your systems, and when we talk about data, we can't forget about Internet of Things and how all those sensors are also adding data into the mix and the volume of data. But that's all useful information which an ERP can gather, and then we can make better decisions on any, for example, there on the inventory where we sell products, and we might need to bring in more inventory to fulfill the customer order, which then impacts cash flow and the profitability and the revenue. So everyone gets involved and has that one site of the business running. So that's an ERP, an enterprise resource planning tool. And the ideal state is that, yes, it is managed through one system. Typically, this is managed by multiple systems. It's very difficult to have one system for your whole business. Some companies do achieve this, some of the larger ones, but typically we see ERPs for specific units. So let's just talk about this here. So typically you have the financial management and maybe the supply chain management tied together. So that's where your Maximos might talk to the Oracle or SAP, and maybe your project management. We'll just do this loop here. We'll just bring this up. Then you have the project management there, just tying together with your financial management. And that's where you don't then look at your projects, how much they're costing, the projected schedule of the delivery of those projects. So you can start to plan out people as well, the resources as well as the financials, and start to bring that into your annual budgeting and your planning ahead for the year. So as you can see, linking all these together creates a bit of a diagram here in terms of the lots of lines connecting lots of systems together. So just think what that's like in an organization. And that's just an example of why ERPs are such complicated projects. So today, that's why I really wanted to get into what factors to consider when running or doing an evaluation of an ERP. So here are the factors. There are a number of them, and I want to run through them one by one. And then we're just going to do a little trick here on these sliders. I love sliders. I do this all the time when I'm working with my technology scaling projects, on factors to consider. And then it will give you a risk profile of the project you're working on for your ERP. So first thing to consider is the amount of customization. How much customization versus standardization you're going to have with your ERP. In other words, do you need to adapt your ERP to work with your business? Because you're buying these products off the shelf from the vendors, from the SAPs, the Oracles, the PlanViews of the world, the Workdays of the world. Do you change the processes to match your business, or do you change your business to match the process, to match the system? That's one of the first considerations. I'm going to run through these one by one, and then we'll just do a group together to show you the risk and the complexity around it. The other one is number of integrations. Remember previously on the previous chart there around, let's just go back there, the previous chart, how you're integrating all these systems together. So when we're talking here, what's the number of integrations that we're having to work with? How many systems do you want your ERP to connect with? Because the number of integrations will increase the complexity and the cost of the project. Next up is the amount of process change. So we talked earlier around the customization. That's just the IT, the system configuration. The third point here around the process change is if your business is having to change because you're bringing in the system, then that's an impact on people. People are used to a certain way of doing things. So the amount of change is another factor. Stakeholders, number of stakeholders. So this is often forgotten on projects and ERPs. And I want to really reinforce this point and remember, you want to take note of this, because this is all about decision velocity. How quickly do you make decisions for projects, an ERP system that you're bringing in? Even right from the beginning about in which technology ERP you're selecting. How many people are involved in that decision? How many layers of management does a decision needs to go through? So when we're running these projects, the number one thing I see stalling projects is how quickly decisions are made, how many people are involved, because you typically need to get consensus on a decision. That takes time. That impacts the project delivery for ERPs. So one way around this is has a very clear decision-making criteria, but the number of stakeholders involved will increase the complexity. Number of business units. We talked earlier around, or departments. We talked earlier around that diagram showing all of the different complexities of bringing together the HR, finance, the project team, the asset team, supply chain teams, or maybe it's individual business units, like different companies within your overall company portfolio. Each company will have its own way of doing things. Each business unit will have its own way of doing things. The more you bring together into an ERP to create that consolidated view, the more challenging it will be. The better the result, but the more challenging it will be to go through that. And then finally, number of reports. So I don't want to talk about this because a lot of ERP vendors will promise these amazing reports that will come out of their system. But in reality, there's always an element, if not quite a bit of work needs to be done around creating customer reports for exactly what you need from the data. So the ERP systems, generally speaking, are better at just having basic reports, and a lot of them are very good, but allow some time for the number of reports. If it's a low number of reports, you don't need as much time, but be very clear on which decisions you need to make based on the data you need to pull out of your ERP. So it might be around the number of people you have, based on salaries, or based on the inventory and time to order in terms of sales, or maybe the stock replenishment timelines, number of vendors. There's a lot of factors here. So what are those management reports you do now? And then what do you need in future? So as you build up these factors, these sliders, then here's where the magic happens. Then you can start to think through, okay, how do I manage this in terms of the ERP I'm going to evaluate and select? So knowing this going in will save you a lot of time later on. So for example, if the amount of customization that you want to do is quite high because you want to make this system work for your business because it's a specialized business, it's been around a long time, that's the way you want to go, maybe it's higher. Maybe there's a higher number of integrations. Maybe the amount of process change is also high, but you're managing to run this fairly efficiently. So maybe the number of stakeholders is fairly low. Maybe it's only a couple of business units, so it's easier to integrate, and there's a low number of reports. So here we're starting to understand the profile of the project of the ERP that you're looking to implement. So you're going into it knowing, okay, we've got fairly high on this side and then low on this side. So this combination here means it's fairly balanced. Overall, you've got a fairly balanced risk project. It's not all high, it's not all low. But bear that in mind if we were to just take this out. If, for example, you had a low number of customization, low number of integrations, low number of process change, low stakeholders, low business units, and low number of reports, that means it's a lower risk project because it's all on that left-hand side. So you know going into the project, it's going to be lower cost, lower complexity, lower risk. If, on the other hand, ended up being on this end of the scale, more on this side, you've got a higher risk project, higher cost, higher complexity. And that's where you might want to say, okay, of all of these factors, which ones can we streamline? Which ones can we make more, can we reduce the complexity or number of factors involved? So for example, here, as we said, you might have the customization integrations, but we're going to reduce the number of process change. We might have a high number of stakeholders, but we're not going to bring all the business units in, and we're going to have a low number of reports. And then here you can see we're starting to have lower numbers and we're balancing the risk and the complexity of the project. So that's a great way to go into a project, just to start thinking through how you, the complexity and how you're working through the project. So then next, let's move into the actual how to select or how to pick the right ERP for your company. And there are 3 stages. So it starts with the requirements, then we go through the evaluation, and then we get onto the selection, those 3 stages. Today, we're not going to cover the implementation of the ERP. That's a whole big topic I'm going to cover in a future Technology Accelerator video. So for today, we're going to cover how you select the right ERP software for your company. So starting with the requirements. First, you've got to know the problem. What's the success criteria? What problem are you trying to solve? That's right up here. What friction is there? Maybe the system is just old, unsupported. Maybe you can't get any upgrades to it. Maybe it's been in the company for too long. The interface is clunky, doesn't make sense for users. Maybe you can't get the reports out of it. Either way, be very clear on what you're looking for to change. What's the problem you're trying to solve? If you're doing too much reporting outside of the system, then it's just a database of it's just a collection of data. Maybe people aren't entering the data into the system. Again, know that those friction, that pain points. And the best way to do that is getting feedback from your team. And when you say your team, it's not just your immediate team. If you're in finance or HR or supply chain, go to the actual users who use the system, the frontline workers who are inputting data into the ERP. What do they find difficult? Maybe they can't use it out of the office because the mobile app is not good enough and even not available. Maybe the time entry is difficult and takes too much time, so they just end up copying the timesheets every week. Either way, get that feedback. Then next, you want to get into that maturity assessment. So this is useful because you're understanding where you are now and where you want to get to. Where are you on this scale of, are we lower maturity or higher maturity? And there's a number of stages there. Typically, there's 5 stages in terms of emerging and basic all the way to advanced. The point here is knowing where you are now and where you want to get to. Because when you upgrade or select an ERP, you don't want to be too far ahead of where you are now. You're not going to suddenly jump to, so for example, if you have a big change on the interface, that might be too much change for the users. So you might need to see, okay, let's find an interface that's easier to use, so it's more intuitive. And as a result, that maturity around the user interface is a bit less of a jump than from where you are now. The other one is reporting as well. If you suddenly have to write a load of reports for the ERP, as a result, you then may have to have all the other reporting systems support that. What are you going to do with that data? What are you going to do? How are you going to make those decisions quicker, even if you get access to these reports? So just think through the maturity of your organization and what you're looking to achieve there in terms of the future state. Think of the roadmap of where the business is going. And then boil all of this together into this last point here, this evaluation scorecard. So that's where you're taking all your criteria and being very clear on how you're going to evaluate your ERP. I actually have a 50-point ERP selection checklist, which I'm going to run through in the next video. But what I wanted to do here is just share the fact that you need to create that checklist, because as soon as you start approaching vendors, you need to have a very quantifiable way of measuring whether it achieves what you want it to do or not. So that's where you get to that requirements. What do you want to get out of your ERP? And that's the first step in picking the right ERP for your company. Then we move on to the evaluation. So this is the second start. So you've got your evaluation criteria. Next up, you do your research. What ERPs are out there? Who uses what system? What's working better? Talk to your friends, colleagues, other people in the industry. Do internet research. Talk to your vendors. Understand what options you have, because then you can then boil it down to a short list of 3 vendors. I'm a big fan of boiling it down to 3 vendors max. Don't try to go to 5, because again, you have to evaluate each one strategically. So start with 3. Then once you've boiled it down to 3, get them involved. Start talking to these vendors and going through a vision session. Tell them where you are now Tell them where you want to go. What do you want to achieve? Back to those pain points. Remember earlier we talked about these pain points. Sharing that with the vendors. So how do you help us fix this problem? That's going to move you through that visioning of the future. And again, moving up your maturity assessment as well. Again, the vendors are great because they've a lot of experience from doing ERP implementations with other clients, just like you, so they can help. So use that as part of your evaluation. Then you'll get into the pilot and demos. I'm actually going to take out demos. You might be wondering why. Surely demos are good. I've been through so many demos that demos always show you the best of a system, which are great. And so if you want to do demos as part of your RFP process, sure, go for it. But just don't spend too long on the demos. Where you really want to spend time is doing a pilot. Maybe have them come into it's so easy these days with the cloud environments to stand up a quick environment of your selection of ERP vendors that you want to work with. Give them a sample of your data. You can sign the NDAs, non-disclosure agreements. They can start working with the data and do a pilot on your information and your data to start showing you how it works. This is so, so important and so much more valuable than a demo because you get to know how the team works, the vendor works, because you're seeing them work with your data, work with your teams. It takes a bit more effort, a bit more investment, but it really starts to show how they can work with you because you're going to be entering into a long-term relationship when you select them. So this is that first, it's dating, if you like. You're starting to date your vendors to understand how you're going to work together and how well you're going to get on. So using a pilot is absolutely critical for those three that you selected. Then, based on the pilot and the evaluation scorecard, you then can go away and do the evaluation. So this is where you're going through it, checking off the list, rating it on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 to 3, and coming up with overall scores for each of those the three vendors that you've selected for your ERP. Then once you're getting down to boiling it down to maybe the 1 or 2, the final selection, then also get some references. And I don't mean going to the vendors to just get references from them. I mean, talk to actual people who are using the system. Ask the vendors if you can talk to them without the vendor present so you can get some real life understanding of how they work with the system, what was good about it. Ask about the implementation. Ask why they use this system. Ask why they selected this system over their previous ERP system. What did they achieve at it? What were their requirements? How did they work with the team? Did the project deliver on time? What was it like working with vendors? There are lots of questions you can ask here around the references, and it's so, so useful to get that real world experience from people who've actually been through it or going through it right now. So we've done the requirements, we've done the evaluation, then you move into the selection. So we finished off that scoring and selection with the evaluation and the references. Now you get into the nitty-gritty of creating the business case. This is creating your case for change. Again, you've picked a vendor. You may not have signed the contract yet because that's coming next in the negotiation, but you're putting together the financials, understanding the details of what it takes to implement this ERP in your company. What's the pricing model? Is it per month? Is it stage payments? Is it a 2, 3, 5, or 6 year commitment? What are the servicing costs? How are upgrades managed? How do you get help and support after the project goes live? Really get into that business case of understanding exactly what you're getting into, because you need to get commitment from the company to really buy into this ERP decision, because you're going to need their support once the project starts. Then you're getting into the contract negotiation, and this kind of goes hand in hand with the business case, because you're understanding the cost, but then you're using that cost, what the company can afford, with also what the contract and the vendor can provide. So it's a bit of a two-step back and forth process here. This is where you want to bring in legal, supply chain, bring in the experts to go through this contract. Don't do this alone. Get as many people as you can who have knowledge of this contract to really go through it. I've seen too many contracts where there's ambiguous statements or not lack of clarity. So when you come to the project delivery, it's much more difficult to work through. Then you can build out the roadmap. It's part of the business case, but you're starting to get a bit more details of what does this look like. And the reason for that with the business case, the contract, and the roadmap is you can then start that decision communication. That's sharing the fact that we're moving ahead with an ERP to the company. You're starting to get buy-in. You haven't finalized the contract just yet, haven't kicked off the project just yet, but you're starting to get momentum, buy-in to the fact that we're embarking on a multi-month, maybe in a multi-year project. So it's really, really important to start with that initial decision and making sure it's communicated and getting a team buy-in from each of the teams who are going to be involved. So those are the 3 steps for how to pick the right ERP. There's a ton of detail behind this, and in the time we have today, I just want to share with you, here are the key steps, and I'm more than happy to work with you. If you want to reach out, we can actually go into details on any one of these aspects, because there's a lot of detail to cover on each one. But I wanted to share with you today these 3 key buckets of work that you need to go through to fast track, but also be methodical and do fulsome evaluation and selection of your ERP. So just to round this all up, just to bring it all together, here's the evaluation checklist. So as you mentioned, it always starts with knowing the problems. What are you trying to solve? What's that first thing? What's the success measure? Why are we doing this upgrade? Is there enough reason to embark on a multi-year or certainly multi-month project with a significant investment of time and effort to get this ERP in place? Appetite for change. This is often missed when we're thinking about an ERP project, is that because of the change on the organization, what else is going on? What other projects are happening in the next few years? What has the company been through over the last few years? People get change fatigue. So going into an ERP is going to involve a lot more time and effort. So you need to make sure that people have the capacity to work through this. And if they don't, what's going to drop from the plates? How do we make room for this project going forward? This is a management decision, because it has to be made carefully based on what you've been through, what you're going through, and how much capacity there is for change to introduce this new ERP. Start with what you have. You might think that's weird and odd when we're talking about evaluation of a new, but always go back to why, knowing your problems. Why doesn't the current ERP meet your requirements? Talk to the vendor. Maybe there's an upgrade. Maybe there's some enhancements you can make to the current system, which will actually solve your problems for you. Either way, it's worth that discussion first, because then you might find, that it actually makes sense to stay with the current system with some changes to the business process or enhancements to the system, which will actually solve your problems now. Or maybe it's an interim step, back to that roadmap we created in that 3rd step before. Maybe the roadmap is we do some interim changes this year, but then we do the full ERP upgrade and replacement next year. Either way, you're starting to build up all these factors together based on things like the appetite for change and the capacity for change in your organization, as well as budget and availability and timing. Then look at your ecosystem as well. We talked earlier around number of systems involved. Even if you're not rolling the ERP out to different departments, there's always going to be connections, reports, and people are going to need to use the system. There's training involved. So what's that ecosystem of change? It's not just about one department, even though they might be leading it. There's always other teams involved. So what's that ecosystem of systems of technology you need to bring together? Especially around reporting, you're always going to have a better reporting system to cope with the new system and the new data coming out of the ERP. Then you create that case for change, as we mentioned earlier, around that decision, communicating the decision. You're starting to build momentum. Make sure you have that case for change. You need to sell this new ERP internally once you've made the decision, get people's buy-in to it. Always go back to what's in it for them. Don't talk about the fact this is amazing, great interface, it's going to save us money, etc., etc. That's all about you. What's it going to mean to them? And it's a different message for each department. So the message to the supply chain group might be different from the finance group, it's different from the HR group. Tailor that message around what the ERP will help with them. So with the HR, it's around the people. With the supply chain, it's around the asset management. With the finance team, it's around the financials. Give them insights into how this new ERP will ultimately benefit them, their role, make their jobs easier, save them time, give them less hassle. Then we, as I mentioned, go through that evaluation and select, which we've already covered on the previous slide. Then once you've made that selection, you get into that detailed project planning. So this is the whole next stage. Once we've agreed on the decision, ERP, selected it, finalized the content, finalized the contract, got that case for change. Then we're getting into the detailed project planning. And then we move into the project delivery. And that's a whole different session, which I'm going to talk about in terms of configuring your ERP, the project implementation. Got lots of stories and insights to share on project delivery for ERPs. And I'll do that in a future video. But the purpose of today was just to talk you through ultimately that how to select the right ERP for your company. Hope that was useful. And if you have any comments or questions, feel free to reach out. Always available. You can find me on LinkedIn, drop a comment on YouTube, reach out to me at john@wedeliveryourvision.com. And I'll look forward to seeing you in the next Technology Accelerator video.